In our previous examples of solving equations with absolute values, there was only one absolute value in the equation. There was only an absolute value on one side of the equation. Things get a little more complicated if there's a plus or minus on both sides of the equation, but not actually that much more complicated, as long as we're careful. Right? We have to be careful with this plus or minus abbreviation that we're using. So let's see, this equation, solve for x. Absolute value of x plus 7 equals absolute value of 2x minus 3. Well, we have our absolute value isolated. In fact, we have both absolute values isolated, right? Each absolute value is by itself on one side of the equation. And so, right, there are two ways. So on the left-hand side, we have x plus 7 and inside an absolute value. And on the right-hand side, we have 2x minus 3 inside an absolute value. And remember, there are two ways for the absolute values of these things to be equal to each other. These two things are either equal or they're negatives of each other, right? So we need a plus or minus again. So our equation of absolute values turns into the equation x plus 7 equals plus or minus 2x minus 3. Now notice I've put parentheses around this right-hand side, 2x minus 3, before I put the plus or minus in front. And that's important because the absolute value symbol, it also acts like a grouping symbol. And so we have to acknowledge that this 2x minus 3 is grouped. So once we remove the absolute value, it's still grouped, so we have to put the parentheses in there, right? In particular, this minus sign in our plus or minus, we will need to distribute it eventually. Okay, so we get this equation, x plus 7 equals plus or minus 2x minus 3. It's kind of hard to solve this equation with the plus or minus here. So in this case, where we have variables on both sides of this equation with the plus or minus, I think it's easiest to actually write down both versions of this equation. Right? So the version with the plus is x plus 7 equals 2x minus 3. So that's the first version of our equation. The second version of our equation is the version that has the minus sign on the right-hand side. And that version of the equation is x plus 7 equals negative 2x minus 3. And don't forget the parentheses around 2x minus 3. That negative is outside the parentheses. All right, so now we have two equations to solve instead of just one, but now these are totally normal equations, right? Now we can do the usual stuff to solve both of these equations. So let's do the one on the left first. So subtract 7 from both sides. We get x equals 2x minus 10, and then subtract 2x from both sides. I'm going to run out of room. On the left, we get minus x, and then on the right, we get just minus 10. And now we need to multiply both sides by minus 1. So on the left-hand side, we just get x, and on the right-hand side, we get 10. So x equals 10 is our first solution. So now let's go to the other equation that we got, the equation that has the extra minus in it, and let's solve this equation. I think the first step to solve this equation would be distribute this minus sign on the right-hand side. So we get x plus 7 equals negative 2x plus 3. Don't forget that when we distribute the minus sign to the minus 3, it becomes plus 3. And now this equation is a pretty normal equation, so we can finish solving it as usual. Let's add 2x to both sides. That gives us 3x plus 7 equals 3. And then subtract 7 from both sides. I'm going to move up here. We get 3x equals negative 4. And then divide both sides by 3. We get x equals negative 4/3, which, if you want to write negative 4/3 as negative 1 1/3, that's fine too. But I'm going to leave it as negative 4/3. All right, so we got two solutions out of this equation. Our two solutions were x equals 10 or x equals negative 4/3. All right, so solving an equation where an absolute value shows up on both sides is actually pretty similar to solving an equation where there's an absolute value only on one side, as long as we're careful about writing these parentheses and solving each of these two equations that we get. All right, just for practice, let's do one more example. Let's solve this equation for y. Now the equation is absolute value of 4y plus 1 equals the absolute value of y. So when we remove the absolute values, remember we have to put a plus or a minus on a plus and minus on one side or the other. I'm going to put the plus or minus on the right-hand side just because that seems a little easier, right? And I've written these parentheses around my y so 4y plus 1 equals plus or minus, and then inside parentheses y. But right, one reason why it's nice to put the plus or minus on the right-hand side is the parentheses don't actually make any difference because y is the only thing inside these parentheses. So we can write this as 4y plus 1 equals plus or minus y. All right, and as usual, this is an abbreviation for two different equations. So let's write out those two equations and solve them separately. The first equation is 4y plus 1 equals y, which is to say plus y. And the other equation is 4y plus 1 equals negative y. And then we can solve each of those equations. So for the first equation, let's subtract y from both sides. That gives us 3y plus 1 equals 0. And then we can subtract 1 from both sides. We get 3y equals minus 1. And then divide both sides by 3. We get y equals negative 1/3. So there's our first solution. And then for the second version of the equation, 4y plus 1 equals negative y, we can add y to both sides. We get 5y plus 1 equals 0. And then subtract 1 from both sides. We get 5y equals negative 1. And then divide both sides by 5. We get y equals negative 1/5. So we have two solutions, y equals negative 1/3 and y equals negative 1/5.